Whenever I ask anyone whether or not they've played the Souls games, I'm usually faced with an answer that typically goes something like, "No, I don't play games like that. I don't feel like torturing myself." Or, "Those games aren't for me because they're supposed to be obnoxiously difficult." From what I've seen of the Souls series, I'd be inclined to agree, and I've avoided them because my go-to statement about the Souls games is that I like games I can relax to and not have to worry about breaking my controller due to unmanageable rage and frustration caused by the millionth "you died" screen. So I was initially reluctant to commit to such a game, but after seeing statements suggesting that Elden Ring would be more accessible to players, I decided to dip my toe into the Souls-like genre and see what all the fuss was really about. Because on the other side of the camp, gamers rave about how good the Souls games are and paint a narrative that haters of the genre are just annoyed that the game beats them into a bloody pulp until they rage quit, never to return. 5 hours into Elden Ring, and if you'd asked me my opinions about the game, I would have said that the game was everything I had initially feared. That this is an obtuse game, infuriatingly difficult to understand, and is specifically designed to be annoying in every single way. But what's my opinion after sticking with the game for 40 hours? You're watching Deconstructing the Game, my name's Mike, and this is a Noobs review of Elden Ring. Let's get to it. Before we go any further, I'd just like to highlight that my exposure to the Dark Souls series has been virtually non-existent, and I've never played any Souls-like games before playing Elden Ring. So this review is going to be mostly unbiased, and I say mostly because those preconceptions about the game's playstyle had admittedly already seeped in. The purpose of this video is to allow non-Souls players to get a neutral view of the game so they're able to make an informed decision about whether or not they should also take the plunge. Straight off the bat, I can say that Elden Ring has got an incredible character creation menu where you can make pretty much anyone you know in any colour you can think of, changing just about anything you want. The game is in third person, but for the most part you're probably going to be wearing a helmet, meaning that you're rarely going to see your character's face unless you periodically take off your headdress or decide not to use one at all. Deciding what character to choose can be confusing, as initially you don't really know what the difference is between them unless you look at the bottom corner of your screen where it gives you the options to show the character's information and help descriptions, which will allow you to make a better decision based on those characters. The descriptions are not turned on by default, and like many things in this game, leaves you to figure out for yourself. After creating your character, you'll watch a quick static cinematic intro where very little is explained about what's to come. The story is somewhat obscure and there isn't really a great deal of information delivered in the usual cutscene format that I'm typically used to, or large dialogue options that RPG players may be used to as well. So as a newcomer to the Souls genre and Elden Ring, I was quite confused about what was actually going on, and I was always waiting for what some people might describe as spoon-fed explanations. This is something I'm still waiting for 40 hours in, and I'll probably never get. There are various NPCs you meet with their own stories, and they will bring up occasional snippets of lore, but for the most part this is largely up in the air. Elden Ring's a big game, so there were a bit more story dumps and a bit more information further on into the game, but initially within the first few areas there's not an awful lot. In the first playable area I was greeted with an abomination that killed me instantly without remorse. From then on, a second short cinematic played which delivered equally obscure information that left me with more questions that I'd hoped to learn the answers to. Initially, the tutorial felt good. The controls seemed manageable, and if not slightly clunky, the combat seemed relatively straightforward. The tutorial screens told me what buttons to press and what variations of attacks I could use, followed by how to heal and refill my magic meter. This lulled me into a false sense of security because I would soon find that the real world enemies were a lot harder to conquer. Throughout the initial few hours, various tutorial screens would pop up explaining how various mechanics worked, like crafting and leveling up, among other things. Some of these things fell by the wayside because really all I was initially trying to do was survive. Once you leave the tutorial grounds, you're free to explore the entirety of the realm known as the Lands Between, but this is easier said than done because literally everywhere you look there are things that can kill you, and trust me, at some point they probably will. The starting area known as Limgrave has a variety of different enemies that you can start to take on in order to gain those precious runes which are used for just about everything. You can level up your character, buy things and upgrade things using the runes, but be warned because if you get killed, you'll drop all of your runes and you'll only have one chance to retrieve them. If you get killed before you retrieve them, you'll lose them forever. Unfortunately, even after the game telling me this, I had somehow neglected to take notice, and I constantly died many times before realising where I was going wrong. I spent quite a lot of time aimlessly wandering around trying to figure out what my next move was. I won't say much about what the process is in gaining the ability to level up and do things, but what I will say is the game pretty much leaves you to figure it out by yourself, and this is a common theme. What I will say though is keep an eye on what stats you're leveling up because it varies each time. Make sure you're getting the best possible upgrades for what you want to achieve. And let it be known that even though it's not stipulated anywhere, enemies are leveled and so are various portions of the map, so you might find yourself transported somehow to various parts of the map which are surrounded with enemies that are way too strong for you to deal with. After a few hours of exploring what is essentially a tiny portion of a Leviathan map, repeatedly taking on enemies that are too hard to defeat, cursing and praying for sanity, I started to understand that I had to pick my battles in order to survive longer than 2 minutes. Understanding your character's abilities versus your enemy's abilities in any game is key, but in Elden Ring is absolutely essential. You'll need to learn when to sneak and when to fight in order to gain rewards that will assist you in your venture. But I suppose it's not all my fault, because I mentioned the controls felt a bit clunky, and they still do. You see, in Elden Ring you have a lock-on system that keeps you focused on your enemy, and that's great, but when there are multiple enemies, unlocking your view can sometimes be unresponsive and slow, which will hinder your view in confined spaces, and make it harder to see other enemies attacking you from other directions. You can switch between enemies and lock-on, but this is slow to react in some situations and can be unresponsive, leaving you slow to react. Sometimes my character wouldn't run away from a threat and instead slowly backed away when a gigantic hammer was coming down on top of them. They even refused to dodge. If you happen to tap your heavy attack button twice, your character will continue to attack, sometimes laboured and slow, leaving them open to attack themselves. Meaning that you will need to learn to only tap the attack button once when intended. Any unintentional button press will be followed through and you can't cancel them. I honestly find it hard to describe when and how these issues occur, but they can be random. Given time, you'll learn to negate many of these hiccups, but they remain annoying and can be fatal, especially in boss battles. Once you learn this and learn the game's mechanics, you can start to level yourself up, and you'll find that the dreaded "you died" screen starts to become less frequent. You can then start enjoying the world and art style, which I think is absolutely stunning. There are many high up places where you can see for miles through canyons and into valleys, visit glimmering underground caves, and places that look remarkably like Freddy Krueger's nightmares. All of this to say that Elden Ring's world is both enthralling and bewildering all at the same time. Your curiosity will take over and you will be constantly asking yourself what's down the path and where does this river lead. Don't be afraid to venture out and discover new things. The world of Elden Ring is designed masterfully and holds many secrets for you to discover. Some of them in plain sight and some you'll need to think about how to get to them. Despite being called open world, some areas in Elden Ring are designed like levels where you'll need to reach the next site of grace to be able to heal up and even level up in order to progress into the next area. When you reach a site of grace, you can use this to fast travel, which is incredibly useful because something I haven't mentioned until now is that every single enemy respawns every time you die, fast travel, or rest at a site of grace. You also only have a finite amount of health potions at any given time, which you can also recharge at a site of grace for free, but you have to get there first. So if you're like me and enjoy clearing out enemy areas, then be warned because if you manage to clear an area, it won't be clear for very long. The bosses in Elden Ring come in various shapes, sizes, abilities and levels, and you will discover low-level bosses in many caves and buildings which you can always come back to later if you aren't strong enough upon discovery. Bosses and larger selected enemies are the only ones that don't respawn, which you'll be glad to hear, and it makes vanquishing them enemies all the more sweeter. And if you want to share the experience with your friends, you can, because Elden Ring has a co-op option of up to 3 players. Now unfortunately, as you're doing co-op, the progress you've done in someone's server does not transfer to your own game, so if you're playing with 3 of your friends, you're effectively going to have to play the game 3 times over in order for everyone to complete what they want to in the game. But it makes it far easier for killing enemies, and I've heard it's a lot of fun. Me, personally, I like to play my games by myself to figure them out, but I might even try a few games of the round on the PC, or if he transfers back to Xbox, that might become a thing in the future. Playing with friends also has another caveat where other players can invade your realm and fight you, so beware that if you're playing with friends, you may be open to attack from other Elden Ring players. This review is based on a mere 40 hours of playing, and I know people who have played for longer and they feel like they've barely just scratched the surface. If you persevere, play tactfully and do everything you can to level up your character and gear, you'll find that you're really only thinking about what weird and wonderful discovery is around the next corner. Believe me, the initial frustration, anger and rage at your inevitable deaths is greatly overshadowed by the constant wonder and curiosity about what's to come next. And yes, it's probably more enemies that look even more scary than the last one. It took me about 32 hours to finally start to enjoy Elden Ring, despite there being the lack of cutscenes and dialogue, which is really only a personal preference. The combat begins to eventually flow, and you can even eventually relax and enjoy. Elden Ring received 10s across the board and high 90s scores by reviewers before release, which was something I was very skeptical about given the whole Cyberpunk fiasco back in 2020, but I can see why Souls fans have fallen head over heels for this. On a personal level, Elden Ring doesn't rate as high as a 10 for me, but that's only because it lacks things I personally enjoy from an RPG and open world games. And on top of that, I found it a little overwhelming to start with. However, after multiple times of saying I'm done with this game, I can honestly say that as a Souls noob, I've discovered something truly entertaining. And because of this, I will allow my curiosity to guide me through the lands in between to become Elden Lord. My name's Mike, you've been watching Deconstructing the Game, and I'll catch you later.